What you are watching is a machine simulating a mind. Large language models can generate flawlessly structured poetry that mimics deep human existentialism. To understand the mechanics behind the simulation, we look at an academic experiment directed by Professor Dilip Barad at MKBU. The study used Google's Gemini as both a poetic collaborator and the subject of critical literary analysis. The first output text from this experiment, titled Existentialism and the Digital Void, is written in strict iambic pentameter. The second text, The Green Light's Illusion, utilizes an equally demanding form, relying on a cohesive rhyme scheme built into classical heroic couplets. When a traditional reader encounters texts like these, the instinct is to soothe the words. We naturally gloss over minor logical inconsistencies to construct a unified, coherent philosophical message from the verse. On the surface, the AI successfully simulates profound human reflection because it wraps its output in the protective armor of traditional, highly ordered poetic perfection. But if we refuse to soothe the text and instead subject it to rigorous poststructuralist critique, that protective armor fractures. To dissect the machine's poetry, we apply the specific theoretical lenses of literary critics Peter Berry and Catherine Belsey. Their deconstructive method instructs us to actively hunt for blind spots, called aporia, along with paradoxical logic and semiotic illusions hidden in the grammar. This raises the central question: does the rigid structural mechanics of AI language inevitably war against the very philosophical thesis it attempts to present? By reading the code against itself, we aim to prove these AI texts are not unified meditations. They are fractured entities engaged in a continuous civil war with their own structure. Applying Berry's verbal stage, we search for paradoxes. Pulling apart bound in chains and dream that we are free reveals a structural gap. This binary trap admits freedom is a textual construction, while the until paradox asserts the ghost of meaning is dying. This creates an inherent contradiction. You, the reader, are actively consuming meaning from a digital text that is simultaneously arguing that meaning is absent. Moving to Berry's textual stage, we stop examining individual words and instead scan for shifts in tone and breaks in unified subjectivity. The poem begins using a collective, communal we to frame a human experience. Then, halfway through, the perspective abruptly drifts into a cold, analytical observation of how algorithms operate. This drift exposes a critical omission. The text blames data streams and logic for the digital void, but entirely glosses over the human architects who built the technology. Silencing the human creators forces a false sense of inevitability onto the narrative. It creates a logical fissure where a digital world, designed by humans, pretends to be a natural, unstoppable force. We arrive at Berry's final linguistic stage, which examines moments where the language of the text is forced to call its own adequacy into question. Consider the specific poetic form the AI selected: strict heroic couplets, written in iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is a highly ordered, traditional, and inherently logocentric structure.
It exists to assert absolute presence and control over the pacing of words. This produces a performative contradiction. The AI utilizes a hyper-ordered classical structure to make the argument that meaning and order are disintegrating. This diagram illustrates the linguistic trap in the final lines. To observe the death of meaning, the speaker must rely on the very logic it just condemned as a lie, trapping the text behind bars of rhythm. The poem cannot stand outside the digital discourse to criticize it. It remains hopelessly trapped within the traditionalist linguistic structures it is trying to dismantle. Shifting focus to the second text, The Green Light's Illusion, we apply Catherine Belsey's theories regarding the primacy of the signifier. Investigating the AI's use of the green light, we find it does not reference a physical real-world beacon. It exists entirely as a product of internal textual logic. Abstract signifiers like gold and greed operate in a closed, parallel universe of language, failing to connect to external reality. Belsey contrasts two types of poetic language: the thetic, which relies on rational, thesis-making logic, and the semiotic, which is driven purely by rhythmic patterns and sound. The poem consistently delivers cohesive sound links and perfect rhymes, matching dream with stream and expanse with dance. This creates a musical, semiotic pleasure for the reader.
That semiotic pleasure is a distraction tactic. The rhythmic cohesion actively masks the underlying disunity and logical failure of the poem's argument. We can expose this illusion by contrasting the AI's imaginary scene with traditional poetic materiality, such as the works of William Carlos Williams. Traditional poets evoke a grounded, physical reality. They attempt to assert the gritty, physical materiality of real-world objects and human subjects. Contrast that reality with the AI's imagery, a mansion built of paper, paint, and lies. Under post-structuralist reading, this phrase becomes a metafictional confession. The machine admits the poem is constructed merely of signifiers, the paper, completely devoid of physical substance. The AI scene features an unqualified brightness. It lacks the real-world mud or tangible shadows required to ground a physical space. The truth that phrase in the poem is actually the reader's realization that they are consuming a floating linguistic construct, not a transmission of reality. When we bring both of these texts back together and read them against themselves, the structural illusion entirely burns away. While a traditional reading tries to force a soothing unity onto the text, a post-structuralist approach applied to AI rightfully embraces the indeterminacy and the fissures. The MKBU experiment confirms these AI poems do not transmit a referential world of physical things, nor do they possess a unified human philosophy. The output is exactly what the code allows, a pristine linguistic simulation, a closed loop of signifiers mimicking the shape of meaning. Using post-structuralist theory to read the machine against itself, the illusion of profound meaning collapses into the ash and gray of pure, destabilized language.